Hello, hello. This is the first episode of The Other on Cinema podcast. We're called The Other on Cinema podcast because, as to my knowledge, there is only one other podcast dedicated to all things on cinema at the cinema, which is On the Funny. Which, shout out to those guys, big fan, kind of an inspiration for making this podcast. So just a quick intro. My name is Ramsey, and I have my co-host here, Caleb, who I will introduce in a second. But just to give a quick explanation onto what this podcast is, I wanted to start this because, I wanted to talk more about On Cinema, but I don't really have a lot of people to talk to about it with, which I know is a common plight with On Cinema fans, but I didn't want to do a carbon copy of On the Funny, so this is going to be a little bit different. So I've watched pretty much everything On Cinema related. I've been a big fan of it for a very long time. My friend here, Caleb, has not really watched it at all, and I kind of wanted to replicate the experience of getting into the show. Common sentiment I hear from a lot of On Cinema fans is that this show is impossible to recommend to people because you have to absorb a considerable amount of the show before it starts to make sense. And there's hundreds of hours of content to absorb. However, I don't mean to speak for you, Caleb, but I feel like we have pretty similar sensibilities in comedy, so I think this is something you'll eventually enjoy, but we'll see. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Caleb, do you just want to introduce yourself and maybe give a quick overview of just kind of your history with Tim Heidecker and Greg Turkington's comedy?
Yeah, sure. I'm Caleb. Yeah, I mean, I was always a fan of Tim and Eric. Great job. I think I've seen every single episode of that show. And then I remember my first interaction with On Cinema and Greg Turkington was when Tim started doing the On Cinema like YouTube videos that he was uploading. This was back when YouTube like a bunch of comics and comedy actors were doing Bash and Buh and Jash in like 2012. And so I just assumed, oh yeah, like this is going to show up much like all the other projects that were going on at that time. Like I just assumed, oh yeah, they're going to do like a few episodes of this and then it's going to be over. And so I watched a few episodes of it as it was coming out in the very beginning. And then petered off. And then, 10 years, 15 years later, come back to it. And it is this insane sideshow with live events and deep lore. And I think Ramsey and I have one other friend who is deep into On Cinema at the cinema. They're telling me all these stories, and I just have no context for getting into it genuinely, other than to try to dive in and consume, I don't know, hours and hours of content that has been produced over the past 15 plus years, and doing so with a podcast I think is going to be a lot easier, especially because I have someone to talk about it with. Whereas if I was to a lot of comedy properties, if I'm just to try to like experience them alone in my apartment, with headphones on, it feels weird. So I think this is going to be a lot easier to go through, actually, like on a podcast with a friend to go through it with, who already appreciates it as well. Outside of Tim and Eric and bedtime stories and all that, Greg Turkington, I am aware that he plays Baskin Robbins' manager in Ant-Man. that is the extent of my knowledge with Greg Turkington.
Yeah, not to give too many spoilers, but that will actually come up later.
Heck yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Jash. Did you ever watch Tim's Cooking Tips?
I did watch. See, that's the thing. I watched Tim's Cooking Tips, and that was only like 6 episodes or something. So when that ended, I thought,
yeah, and it came out around the same time as On Cinema started. Yeah, for anyone who hasn't watched Tim's Cooking Tips, it's really fucking stupid, but it's hilarious.
It is hilarious. I mean, I don't. It was 15 years ago, so I don't remember exactly what happens. But I do remember I enjoyed Tim's Cooking Tips more than On Cinema.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, just to give a little bit of my background with it. Yeah, similar thing. I watched Tim and Eric Awesome Show in high school. I liked Tim and Eric Awesome Show, but like I wasn't super duper into it. Like I appreciated it, and there was certain stuff of it that I liked. And then a friend of mine who was like a big Tim and Eric fan was like, hey, have you checked out On Cinema? And that would have been around like season 2 or 3. So I've been watching the show and following it pretty much since the beginning. I did drop off of it actually around 2020 when they switched over to the high network, because I was like, I don't want to pay $5 to watch this show. And then 2 years ago, I was very unemployed and got back into it and was like, oh my God, this got so much better. And I got like real deep back into it. And since then I've been obsessed, and yeah, I've just been wanting to talk about it. And my partner, who is very supportive of my On Cinema obsession, I think is getting a little sick of me talking about it to them. But yeah, let's get into it. So we started with the podcast, and I wasn't really sure if we should have started with the podcast, because I don't think it's really necessary to appreciate the show. And I think there's an argument to be said that it's much better to revisit it after you've consumed a certain amount of the show, which is what I did. I didn't even know there was a podcast until about, I don't know, like season 10 of the show. And I went back and revisited it, and I thought it was really funny. But I knew, as someone who was like going into it dry, it maybe not be the best place to start, but I thought, we should just be thorough. So yeah, first things first, Caleb, just like general thoughts about the podcast.
I mean, there's some overlap here between my general thoughts and the notes that I have written. The first few episodes, the first episode starts with not the best audio quality. They're clearly recording inside a vehicle. And then I'm like, okay, well, obviously the show gets better in audio quality. But right off the bat, it gets worse and worse in audio quality. It starts off obviously recorded in a vehicle on an iPhone, and then recorded in an echoey hallway on an iPhone, and then recorded in a busy restaurant or bar where Tim is having to yell at the top of his lungs, and then it is clipping so badly you can barely make out anything he's saying. So my thoughts of the podcast are clearly this is them getting their footing, both comedically and I guess technically, like literally the tech that they are using to record the podcast. And again, this is back at least 2011, maybe even a little earlier than that. So, I hate to say this guy's name, but Joe Rogan, I feel, I feel like the Joe Roganification of podcasts had not like fully happened even at that point. And so people that were doing podcasts were still figuring out how to do a podcast. And similarly, Tim and Greg were still figuring out how to do a podcast as the podcast was going on. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the early like, okay, how do we step on each other's toes as comedically effectively as possible is clearly going on. You can see that. Um, Also, how can we talk about movies with doing the least amount of research possible and having the most surface level observations, even incorrect surface level observations as possible? Yeah, I mean, I can see the gears churning, I'd say, and then um, also towards the end of the podcast, the political ideations of Tim Heidecker, the character, start to pop through. I'm sure after doing 3 hours of meandering meandering surface level commentary on film, they had to think like, okay, what sort of deeper comedy can we pull off here? Yeah, so at least that is my impression, is that the 4 plus hours of the initial podcast were essentially Tim and Greg uh, essentially like ironing out like what it was going to be going forward.
So do you know anything about like the history of like why they started the podcast?
I don't know anything. The one thing that I can assume a few things, which is that um, I mean, I don't know how Tim and Greg met each other, but clearly Tim loves Greg. Tim, the real life human being, not the character, loves the real life human being, Greg Turkington. At least comedically, like he loves how dry Greg can be and how well he sticks to character and refuses to break. Um, and I feel like Tim clearly wanted to have fun in that realm, as opposed to kind of the Tim and Eric world that he had been in, which is a lot kind of bigger and broader. Um, and then also at the time, I know podcasts were like becoming more of a thing. And I'm sure after listening to a lot of meandering podcasts, he found humor in that and wanted to, make fun of that. Also, as someone who has gone back and watched like Roger and Ebert, Roger and Ebert are very similar to Tim and Greg in this show in terms of their kind of petty disagreements, their surface level observations of what they think makes a movie great or poor, and sort of missing the point of movies. Um, so I'm assuming that at least, on like a thematic level, was informing the decisions, but I do not have any actual information about how this all started.
Well, yeah, the history of how they started this was so Tim and Greg were filming a movie together. I want to say back around 2010 called The Comedy. I don't know if you've seen that, and they basically started recording this podcast on their phone in between takes when they were bored, and the idea was they were aping really inane movie guy podcasts back around when podcasts were exploding and there was a bunch of just stupid podcasts. I mean, it's funny that they were making fun of it then because it's even worse now. And just a quick question off the top of my dome: have you ever watched the very, very dry parody of the Joe Rogan Experience Tim Heidecker did on his actual podcast a couple of years ago?
Similar to this podcast, I made it halfway through that.
It's hard to watch because it's really, really dry. I think it's maybe one of the funniest things Tim has ever done. And if you can make it through to the end of it's howlingly funny. But anyway, but yeah, that's the history of it. They never really had like plans to do anything with this, but I guess they decided to just keep doing it and taking it a little bit more seriously. But yeah, do you want to maybe just jump into some highlights for you?
I just want to say too, the the two guys opposite Tim Heidecker in that Joe Rogan skit, they do show up in the Fallout TV show.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, they ran. So like clearly someone was a fan of that bit and just were like, yeah, let's just hire them.
Those guys, I'm blanking on their names. Those guys are really funny though. A lot of their stuff is making fun of sort of like semi right wing intellectual sort of stuff. They have this bit where they're parodying like one of those videos of like Jordan Peterson destroys this college student, but they're like arguing over like a child's like picture book, and it's very funny.
Yeah, no, they're very funny guys. Yeah. So I'm ready to get into this.
So this was fun re-listening to this. It's been a while since I have. I kind of wasn't expecting to enjoy it, but I forgot how funny some of the stuff was. The first thing that made me like really laugh out loud was one of the early episodes where they're reviewing the China syndrome, and Greg says it's Field of Dreams meets nuclear disaster.
I mean, I do have a lot of notes if you want me to go into
Yeah, no, go into it.
So one of the quotes that I have, if you are a film buff, you can date a movie by the cars you see in action, that's from Greg. I didn't go through every single location they went through and were recording in. One of the locations I didn't mention, they were hoofing it down the streets of San Francisco, yelling into a cell phone while cars passed by, buses stopped to pick people up, and both Tim and Greg were short of breath. Like the first few episodes, they're clearly, yes, like you were saying, like they were just recording it to pass time between filming on the comedy. I've seen the beginning of that movie. I haven't watched it all the way through.
I'm not gonna lie. I don't think that movie's very good.
Okay, good to know.
That being said, that same director did another movie with Greg Turkington after that, where he is playing. Are you familiar with Neil Hamburger?
I am familiar with Neil Hamburger.
So the movie's called Entertainment, and it's basically Greg Turkington going on a really sad comedy tour doing the Neil Hamburger character, but it shows him not in character off of it. And I used to do stand-up a long time ago, and it really shows like the very depressing side of having to do really stupid like and bad like stand-up gigs. Michael Cera randomly shows up in the movie and has this very chilling, disturbing cameo in it. It's very interesting. It's not funny at all. It's a drama. But I would recommend it. It's not like perfect. It's like a 3 out of 5, but I think it's very, very interesting. I think it's more interesting than the comedy. I think the comedy is meandering and kind of pointless, and I feel like what it was trying to say at the time is even less relevant now. But
right, it's my understanding, again, now I sound like Greg Turkington, but I did only watch the beginning and I kind of tuned out because it seemed like it was like deliberately like it's covering a character, and this person is like essentially like an apathetic hipster, like concentrated, right? Like fully saturated to the point where they're just like literally showing up. Like what I remember is them showing up to like a bunch of like day laborers, like Hispanic dudes were like working on like a house, and he just like starts working on it with them just cause he's bored, basically.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing is it's just like a not a biopic, but a character portrait of a extremely like irony pilled, privileged dude in New York, which I felt, had that movie came out like 2006, maybe it would have made sense, but I don't know. I wasn't super into it. Anyway.
But the actual podcast.
Right.
Greg is often in the distance while Tim is clearly much closer to the recording device which I can only assume is his personal cell phone. Again, those are the early episodes, and then their promos and stingers are the only part of the podcast with solid audio quality. They seem to actually be recorded in a soundproofed room with decent recording equipment, which is misleading. Also, Tim says they have different guests on each week, but clearly he only has eyes for Greg. Greg is his only guest. Even the one phone guest they have is still named Greg.
Oh, I did. I didn't even pick up on that. I don't. Do you think that was intentional?
50-50 on that. He might have literally just not have been able to come up with a name other than Greg to call this phone guest. It was clear. I think it was a different person. I don't think it was Greg Turkington. It sounded like just a normal dude.
No, it was a different person because Tim said they had some like contest where you had to submit an essay on Facebook. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, like I said, I wasn't sure if I really wanted to do an episode on the podcast because there's not like too much to say about it. Towards the end of it, around like about 3 hours in, that's when Tim starts to take his weird right wing bent, which will be, not to give too many spoilers, will be a very prevalent thing in the actual show. And when him and Greg like start to actually argue about stuff, I think is when the show gets, the podcast gets particularly funny. But
yeah, I'd say the more that Tim and Greg passive aggressively fight, the better the show is. It does kind of remind me of, because I've been going back through The Simpsons. I've been going back through The Simpsons because I didn't watch it when it was coming out because I wasn't allowed to because my parents were very conservative.
oh, you never watched it growing up?
I mean, I saw like an episode or two.
Oh,
That
okay.
was
So
about it.
you hadn't seen the early seasons of it.
I had not seen the early seasons.
Interesting.
No.
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
I love. Yeah, I mean, might as well. I love the early seasons of The Simpsons.
I mean, I've been watching the seasons like 3 through whatever. I think I'm into season like 5 or 6 now, and it's my understanding is that at that point the writers had been writing The Simpsons for years and had been kind of like, okay, we've done all the like kind of conventional stories that we can do, and they start doing weird shit and getting more outlandish, at least compared to what animated TV shows had done to that point and sitcoms had done to that point. And I feel a similar way with dropping Tim the character's political takes into the show, having a little more combative of a relationship between him and Greg. I feel like that is what is happening in the third hour of On Cinema at the Cinema, where it's like, okay, we've kind of done all of the like groundwork of figuring out what the show is going to be, and now it's time to like figure out where we can take it from there. Yeah, that was sort of my parallel there. But
yeah, I get what you're saying. Something I will say about the show is we're 16 seasons into it now. Yeah.
Holy
And
crap.
the show, they continue to do surprising things with it.
Heck yeah.
It just gets weirder and wider.
I'm all in.
I'll ask you this question. How do you feel just listening to the podcast? I will give you one reveal, knowing that this culminates into a very realistically portrayed manslaughter trial.
Okay.
Yeah, that happens in the show.
I know Mark Proch shows up in that, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Mark's a central figure in the show.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Then. At least, yeah.
Another thing, kind of later in the podcast, that I thought was interesting, just because this is a little bit relevant now to recent news is the Tim character in the podcast like specifically references InfoWars and
Yes.
starts making gold ads in
Yeah.
the show. And for listeners who aren't aware, The Onion recently took over InfoWars. It's legally complicated. I'm not gonna go into it, but Tim Heidecker, the real person, may or may not actually be in charge of InfoWars going forward. They've put out one little silly video, but I thought that was very interesting.
Especially because they're making references to InfoWars 2 or 3 years before Sandy Hook, even, which I know this is terrible sounding, but I know that was one of Alex Jones's huge claims to fame. Was him
And his downbreaking.
Yeah, and his yes.
That's a big reason why The Onion is in control of InfoWars now.
The same volatile, brazen nature of Alex Jones, which made Alex Jones as huge as he was, is the exact same outlandish, brazen nature, which continues to bring him down further into the depths. Which is responsible for Tim Heidecker potentially replacing him as the host of InfoWars, which is crazy. But yeah, kind of prophetic to have Tim Heidecker referencing InfoWars in 2011, 15 years before he kind of is taking over it, and way before Sandy Hook, way before Donald Trump and Alex Jones's sort of I guess larger participation in mainstream politics. So yeah, I mean, clearly Tim Heidecker, the real life human being, was going down some rabbit holes to find out everything he could about these right wing grifters, and was and his own personal comedic sensibilities, which were guiding him through these rabbit holes, were also, what, there were probably like 7 people listening to the On Cinema podcast at this point. So
Yeah.
he felt zero reservation on letting that bleed into the podcast, and clearly he let that become a central part of his character in the podcast.
Yeah, just to kind of speak on that, and I'm sure this is something we're going to talk about more going forward, but yeah, especially in the earlier seasons, Tim does a lot of commentary on kind of disaffected right-wing conservative men, and he's always a couple of years ahead of the ball before it becomes like mainstream knowledge with some of the stuff he brings up. But his commentary, I think, is very good because it's both biting, but at the same time, I think it's coming from a place of trying to be somewhat empathetic and like actually understand these people, which makes it funnier. And because it's not just trying to be like, oh, you're so dumb, sort of stuff.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I feel they're definitely, at least so far, there is an element. I mean, he's not outright saying like, "Oh, you're so dumb" or anything like that.
Well, I mean that's it. That's in the thought of it, but there's a way to do it, which isn't just being like mocking.
Yeah, I think there's I forget who said it. I know it from Norm Macdonald, but I know that he was quoting someone else, where he's talking about people that were doing Trump impressions, back in like 2016, and he was talking about how people that were doing those impressions, they weren't. I think he was talking about Alec Baldwin in particular. It's so much in this podcast, I'm going to sound like Greg Turkington. And he was talking about how if you want to do an effective, good impression, how you can't just dislike the person, how you have to like them and understand where they're coming from on some level. And I feel like Tim is good at doing that, despite the fact that you can clearly tell that Tim, the real life human being, is not a fan. But you can tell that he is actually trying to figure out where this person is coming from on a quote unquote deeper level. And I think, it makes the comedy a lot funnier because it can go a lot deeper and on a lot more sort of I guess, horizontal directions as well. It can fill, he can fill the details of whatever whatever right wing sort of character he's playing. He can fill the details of like where all their like insecurities are and where those are coming from, and it does make it funnier while also being, less outright adversarial, less thin than a lot of other impressions that I've seen of right wing like pundits and whatnot.
Right on, right on. Yeah, I don't have too much more to say about the podcast. I mean, I actually do, because there's a lot of Easter eggs. Well, they're not Easter eggs, but there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out later in the series that I don't want to spoil for Caleb. That, again, this is why I didn't necessarily want to do the podcast first, because I think it is a lot more interesting to go back and talk about if you've already, consumed a good chunk of the show. But, that's where we're at. So I don't really have too much more to say about it. Do you?
I have more notes.
What are your notes?
Okay. I'll just go into them now. So even after they get actual audio gear, Greg is still kept slightly quieter and more echoey in the mix, making him still feel like he's far away, shouting to Tim from behind, trying to get his attention and make his point heard.
Yeah, that is something that will never end in the show.
And then this is a little more fundamental to not just the podcast, but on the cinema as a whole. Being a film buff used to mean something, particularly when people had to actually go to theaters to watch movies. But ever since the advent of the VHS, all it means is that you have successfully sat on your ass for a few hours here and there. I have some quotes from episodes. Blockbuster. Gone with the Wind with commercials is about 5 hours. Regarding Bad News Bears, and in the end, they win it all. No, they don't. They don't.
I think they famously lose at the end.
That is what Bad News Bears is most known for, I'm pretty sure, is that they do not. Regarding Saving Private Ryan, Tim asks, have you seen this movie? Greg says, I did. Not watch it all the way through. It's Oscars week, and Tim says, we are celebrating Oscar.
That's also going to be a reoccurring thing.
I forget which movie it is, but Greg at some point gives a movie a 10 out of the 10. And in regards to a sequel on Netflix, I think it's Greg who calls it a nequel.
What does that mean?
It's a sequel on Netflix, a nequel.
Nequel. I didn't catch that.
Nequel. Yeah, those are my notes. Again, I feel like they're ironing out. It's so crazy that they kept up with it. Like you were saying, it's a casual project that they were just doing on the side to kill time, basically, when they were bored between takes, with the hindsight that we have now, knowing that they go on to continue doing it for 15 years and probably will continue doing it for 15 more years. They were at least inadvertently laying out the groundwork for what the show and lore and canon would be going forward. Yes, that is my observation.
Right on. Well, yeah, I don't really have much else to say, so we should probably just cap it off there. But yeah, we're going to keep doing this. Next episode, we're going to go through season 1 of On Cinema at the Cinema on video on YouTube. It's on YouTube. Anyway, yeah, I don't know what cadence we're going to be releasing episodes. Caleb and I are both pretty busy people. I would hope to get an episode out once a week, but we'll see. But anyway, thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.